Hey everybody, welcome back to another video. With all the price action that's happened recently, it felt like the right thing to do an update since our last video, so let's jump right into it. In my last video, I spoke about how the monthly trigger was the absolute breaking point for shorts, and once price broke above it, it would likely trigger MOAS, or a big squeeze, a big push higher, whatever you like to call it. And I did mention that I didn't think it was very likely for price to be able to break above the monthly trigger in May. I thought it would need another month or at least another 15, 20 days for price to pin sideways while the daily trigger caught up to price and then break through the monthly trigger. But I mean, it didn't just break through it, it gapped over above it. So I guess GME decided to skip the entire battle with the monthly trigger and just go straight higher. Now it did reject it on the first time around. The monthly trigger has already adjusted a bit. It was, here. How do I explain this? The monthly trigger was at 20. It shouldn't be at 22.41 right now, but that's where the monthly trigger was at 20 when price rejected 20. So I thought that price would drift sideways for a little bit longer before breaking through the monthly trigger, so that negative velocity could get better. But again, it just decided to completely skip the battle of the monthly trigger altogether. So can't complain about that. So I'm sure everybody's curious, where do we go from here? To me, it looks very similar to the previous monthly trigger breakout that we've had. And remember, when highly shorted equities break out above their monthly triggers, it triggers a really powerful push higher as smaller funds will exit their positions that are in profit, of course, once price breaks above the monthly trigger. So if a fund was short here, or short anywhere here, once price broke above the monthly trigger, that's when they're going to start covering, as they know that anyway, momentum-based algos, breakout traders, FOMO buyers will start pushing the price up anyway once price breaks above the monthly trigger. So that ignition volume, along with shorts covering, calls for a really big move and a lot of acceleration higher once price breaks above the monthly trigger. Those of you that are following me for long enough, I always say to expect very powerful moves once price breaks the monthly trigger. Now here, this isn't really breaking down below the monthly trigger. You could see how the shaded region on the monthly trigger, the shaded purple area, represents that the monthly velocity is very strong and it is likely to hold support. So even though it dipped a little lower, it was able to hold this level for a little bit. And then over here, when it finally broke below, you'll notice that this strong, powerful monthly velocity that told us that the monthly trigger was going to act as support wasn't around anymore over here. It was able to give us a bounce here, bounce here, bounce here. But at this point, you can see the, excuse me, there's almost nothing shaded on the monthly trigger. And that tells you that the monthly trigger is very unlikely now to hold that support. And once price broke below the monthly trigger at 29, it lost a lot of its value on its way down to 972. So monthly trigger, very strong, but you also have to understand velocity as well. So now if we go back to the previous monthly trigger breakout, you'll see that price didn't really start to explode higher until it based above the monthly trigger for a while. In this case, it looks like 1, 2, 3, about 4 months above the monthly trigger. And then what you'll notice is that the daily trigger was able to cross above the monthly trigger and then start to act as support on dips. And the real upside move only started once the weekly trigger crossed the monthly trigger. And that's when all momentum-based algos on every time frame, whether they're on the hourly time frame, the daily time frame, the weekly time frame, the monthly time frame, the 5-minute time frame, the 30-minute time frame, once the weekly trigger is above the monthly trigger, every momentum-based algos that every fund uses, that every institution uses, that every trading firm uses, they're all buying dips. So you don't really, that's why moves like this tend to happen on stocks that the weekly trigger crosses above the monthly trigger. Like if you take a look, not to distract from GME, but when you take a look at a stock like NVDA, you can see that here, once the weekly trigger crosses above the monthly trigger, it's not always a straight line higher, but dips are going to be bought at every level because all time frame algos are just set to buy the dip mode. So and then here's another one. Once the weekly trigger crosses above the monthly trigger, you can see the stock just exploding higher. The daily trigger holding support for most of the time, the weekly trigger stepping in for bounces at times, but in general, once the weekly trigger gets over the monthly trigger, stocks tend to move extremely powerful to the upside. So for GME, I think the latest move higher is nice, and it's nice to see price action validate your thesis, but in my opinion, and this is just my opinion, other opinions are for sure welcome. This is not really much to get excited about, in my opinion, because it does look like the move has only just begun and is in the very early stages. So you could see that the daily trigger and the weekly trigger aren't even close to crossing the monthly trigger yet. And so, although this seems like a big price increase for me personally, I don't believe that this is the end. I'm not saying dips are not possible. I think, maybe not anytime soon, but if price does dip down to the hourly trigger, that could be a good dip buy, because you could see how shaded the hourly trigger is right now. Probably going to be very thick support. And then, as price remains above the monthly trigger, the daily trigger and the weekly trigger will be able to cross above the monthly trigger, putting price back in its most bullish trigger orientation. And then maybe in a few months from now, maybe July, that's when price will really start turning up. So to me, this whole move is just simply acceleration upon breaking above the monthly trigger, which is the strongest acceleration level in any stock at any time. And there was some nice acceleration. I don't think this is the move, though. I think this is just the very, very, very beginning of the move. So what I expect to happen over the next coming months is that these triggers, the hourly and the daily trigger, they'll slowly cross higher, and they'll cross above the monthly trigger, and they'll put GME in its most bullish trigger orientation. Momentum-based algos, trend traders will be all buying dips and playing the breakouts, and it looks like GME is just going to be back in its bullish trigger orientation. So I think this is fun, a lot of volatility, a lot of IV, a lot of hot elevated IV. So it's going to be definitely a lot of price swings. But I think this is just the early stages. I think I drew this a little too short, obviously. But I think once we get to July time and the triggers are looking much better, that's when price will really be able to make this kind of move, which I'm sure most of us are eager to see. So I just think at the end of the day, the most likely scenario is maybe like something like that, and then just start the major climb higher. I'm not a great artist. I didn't necessarily mean that there was going to be a huge dip. I just meant that anywhere in this range, I think is fine over the next few months. And then by that time, the daily trigger and the weekly trigger will easily be able to cross above the monthly trigger, and we can get a bullish trending market for GME. And that's it. Just upside, relentless upside over the course of a year or 2 years, however long it lasts. And, of course, the fact that it's highly shorted might help price reach higher numbers than one might think realistic. But that's really all I got for you guys. To me, just again, to summarize, it looks like there was some nice acceleration due to the monthly trigger breakout. And then as long as price can just remain above 30 or even 25 or even 30 or even 35, like anywhere in that range at worst case, if it does want to keep going, maybe top out at 100 and then have a deep retrace to the weekly trigger. I could see that scenario as well. In fact, if you ask me personally, that's actually my most likely scenario. A nice breakout to about 100 area, then pull back all the way to the weekly trigger, which is very, very, very normal. You'll see it in the video. It's very, very, very normal. Shouldn't be much cause for alarm. You can see price topping off at 504 and pulling all the way back to 391, catching support at the weekly trigger, and then continuing higher. It's GME. NVDA's move up after breaking the monthly trigger was really smooth. I doubt it's going to be this smooth of a ride like NVIDIA had. I would definitely guess that it's going to be more something like more volatile swings. So let's go back to GME. This is becoming a mess, but you guys get the picture. Anything above 30 is fine. You know, you want to play the volatility and everything. You want to have fun with it. Be my guest. Like I have no issue with it. Do whatever you got to do. But and this is what I think we could see: a move up to 100, and then a lot of consolidation for maybe a month or two while the daily trigger and weekly trigger catch up to price. Then once price eventually hits the daily trigger, then continue onward. But worst case scenario, that price just remains above 30 for the next couple of weeks, maybe a month, maybe 2 months, while the daily trigger and weekly trigger make their climb above the monthly trigger. I think GME is set to go on a bull run for a very long time, and I think it'll be exciting times. So that's all. If you guys have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments, and I'll get to them. And if you like the video, I'm still trying to get back all my Twitter followers that I lost, and every like and share helps me a lot. So thank you guys.